The hum of the Concordia's engine was a constant low drone beneath Captain Mira Halden's boots. It was the kind of sound that faded into the subconscious after years in space, but today it grated at her nerves. The bridge shimmered in sterile brilliance, reflective surfaces echoing every motion, every voice. Holographic displays hovered midair, streaming galactic charts, diplomatic dispatches, and security feeds. The room was a marvel of interspecies cooperation. Humans, Trivans, Circali, and trail officers worked side by side. But Mira stood alone. Korr padded beside her, his claws ticking against the metallic floor with steady confidence. He moved like a shadow, always alert, his amber eyes darting between personnel. A husky-wolf hybrid, he was a relic from Earth's past in the eyes of most on the ship, an outdated companion species in a future where synthetic aids and telepathic drones had supplanted instincts and fur. Still, Korr didn't care. He was bound to Mira with something deeper than protocol, something that could not be replicated by code. They walked the length of the command deck, Mira in full uniform, black with faint silver tracery, her insignia glinting at the collar. Whispers followed her. A Trivan officer made a clicking noise, mocking. A pair of Circali exchanged glances and thin, lizard-like smiles. Primitive behavior persists, one murmured in their rasping dialect. The universal translator made no attempt to mask the disdain. Mira paused just briefly. She felt the old impulse to respond, to cut them down with words or worse. But the memory of too many tribunals, too many lectures about cultural cohesion, stopped her. Instead, she knelt beside Korr and scratched behind his ears. "Let them talk," she muttered. Korr's ears twitched. His tongue lolled for a second before vanishing again behind sharp teeth. He was calm. He always was, until he wasn't. The lift doors opened ahead. Counselor Vilek awaited her in the observation lounge, an elongated chamber of obsidian glass and low-gravity seating. He rose when she entered, tall and thin like most of his species, with translucent skin that shimmered violet under the ship's lighting. His 6 fingers clasped before him in mock politeness. "Captain Halden," he said, not looking at her, but rather at Korr, still refusing to conform. "Good morning to you too, Counselor." He gestured to the chair across from him, where Mira did not sit. "Your creature. It sheds. He doesn't." Vilek's face twitched. "I understand sentimental attachments. Even in trail culture, there are ceremonial bonds with our life mothers. But bringing a beast on a diplomatic vessel, it undermines our progress." Mira's jaw tightened. "Korr is not a beast. He's part of my team. You're the only commanding officer aboard with a companion classified as non-sentient. It raises questions. Let them ask." Vilek sighed, as though Mira were a child failing to grasp a simple lesson. "The Council is preparing a motion to restrict all non-sentient organic life forms aboard Unity fleet vessels. I expect you will not take kindly to it." Mira leaned forward. "I'm not the only one who won't." Vilek smirked. "Humans are adaptable. You'll adjust." "No, Counselor. We're loyal." She turned before he could respond, Korr already moving beside her. The lift doors closed behind them in silence. Back on the bridge, tension bristled through the air. Lieutenant Ilias approached, expression grim. "Captain, you need to see this." Mira followed him to the security bay. A holo feed played on loop, recorded just hours ago. Mira saw herself walking through the engineering level, Korr trotting beside her. The footage zoomed to a tight angle on Korr, then slowed to highlight a flick of his ear the moment he paused, then veered sharply left toward a maintenance hatch. A split second later, sparks erupted from the panel, electrical overload. "He pulled me away just before that short. Could have fried half the systems," Mira said. "Exactly. And he wasn't trained for electrical detection. He's trained to watch me. That's all he needs. Ilias nodded. Counselor Vilek requested the footage. Of course he had. Let me guess. He wants to claim it was random luck. Or instinct, not intelligence. Mira looked at the looping video again. There was no randomness in Korr's movement. She'd seen it too many times, in combat, in disaster zones. He didn't guess. He decided. Keep a backup of this, she said. Encrypted. By the time she reached her quarters, fatigue had wrapped itself around her spine. She slumped into the chair by the desk, unzipped her collar, and leaned back. Korr lay beside her, nose on paws, eyes always open. He's going to push it, she said aloud. Vilek, the vote. They'll pass it, and then what? Confiscation? Relocation? Korr thumped his tail once against the floor. She smiled. Yeah, I like to see them try. The door chimed. Mira tensed. Enter. Commander Tellis stepped in, a Circali officer with a reputation for brutal honesty. He inclined his narrow head in greeting, then closed the door behind him. I wanted to speak off record. That's rare. Some of us, he said, choosing each word carefully, recognize loyalty when we see it, even when it wears fur. Mira tilted her head. You're not a fan of Vilek's motion. I think it's short-sighted. Some among us forget that unity requires respect, not assimilation. Then say that to the council. I may, but I suspect actions speak louder. Be ready, Captain. We may all be tested soon. After he left, silence returned, dense and heavy. Mira looked at Korr again. He looked back. There was something in those eyes, patience, perhaps, or prophecy. She reached out and ran a hand along his thick fur. You're going to make them eat their words, aren't you? Korr didn't move. He didn't need to. Later, as lights dimmed for ship-wide night cycle, Mira stood at the observation window in her quarters, watching distant stars drift like embers. Somewhere out there, homespun silently on its axis, Earth so far removed from this place it may as well have been myth. The door chimed again. She sighed. Come. A messenger drone floated in, dropped a small datapad on her desk, and zipped out without a word. Mira picked it up. The council's motion had passed the preliminary vote. She had 72 hours to surrender Korr for transport to a neutral holding facility. Her hand clenched around the device. Korr rose from where he had been resting and walked to her side. No, she whispered. We're not running, and we're not giving in. Outside, the stars waited, quiet, watching. Mira woke to the soft vibrations of the Concordia's engines, the faint pulse of the ship's wake reverberating through the walls of her quarters. For a moment, she considered ignoring the noise, rolling over, and drifting back into the comfort of sleep. But the weight of the previous night's events loomed over her like a storm cloud. The motion had passed. The council had voted. The decree was final. Korr was to be confined, perhaps even removed, a punishment for his perceived irrelevance. She swung her legs over the side of her bed, her boots silently touching the cold floor. Korr, as always, was already awake. His head was resting on his paws, his amber eyes locked onto her. No growls, no anxious pacing, just that quiet, unwavering presence that had stood by her side for years. You heard, she murmured, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. He thumped his tail once in acknowledgement. A low chime sounded from the comms unit, slicing through the stillness. Mira tapped it open without thinking, knowing it would be someone with news, bad or worse. A holographic display flickered to life in front of her, revealing Ilias's tense face. The lieutenant's usual calm had been replaced with an unmistakable edge of urgency. Captain, you need to see this. Her stomach tightened. What's happened? Meet me in the security bay. Now. The short walk to the security bay was filled with the weight of each step. Mira had long ago learned the unpredictable rhythm of space travel. How one day everything could be serene, and the next, chaos erupted without warning. She didn't know what was coming, but the tightness in Ilias's voice told her it wouldn't be good. Inside the security bay, the walls were lined with rows of security monitors, each one tracking different sections of the ship. The familiar blue glow of the screens illuminated Ilias's face as he gestured to the central holo display. "Watch this," he said, voice low, and flicked his fingers to bring up a feed. It was a recording from a maintenance area deep within the ship, one of the cargo bays. Mira immediately recognized the location. They had installed a new system there just a few days ago. It should have been secure. The camera zoomed in on a small, tight area. Two crew members were working near the maintenance panel, exchanging quiet words as they adjusted settings. Then, there was movement from the shadows, a figure slipping quietly into the frame. Mira's eyes narrowed. A figure that wasn't supposed to be there. The alien appeared on the screen, one of the trail mercenaries who had been aboard for security purposes. Mira had never fully trusted their presence on board, and the footage confirmed her unease. The mercenary moved with quick, efficient grace toward the power grid, accessing the wiring with a tool that shouldn't have been in the area. "You see that?" Mira asked, her voice sharp. "He's tampering with the system." Ilias nodded. "It's not just tampering, Captain. He's reprogramming the power flow to overload the system. It'll fry the entire control center within minutes." "Why hasn't it been stopped?" she demanded, scanning the footage for any signs of the crew catching on. Ilias hesitated. "It looks like sabotage, Captain. And I think this is just the start." Mira felt the shift in the air, the familiar dread settling like ice in her veins. If someone was trying to sabotage the ship, there could be far worse things hidden in the works. Her instincts screamed at her to act quickly, to reach out to command. But there was a bigger issue at hand. "Is there any way to stop the sabotage?" she asked, her mind working through the options. Ilias's lips pressed into a thin line. "We can try to override it, but the system's already locked down tight." Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. The security feed shifted again, showing the mercenary calmly exiting the area, blending back into the crowd of aliens and crew members who remained oblivious. Mira gritted her teeth. The ship was under attack, and yet, for the moment, it seemed like the majority of the crew would never know until it was too late. Korr was standing now, his eyes fixed on the display, as though he understood the threat too. "Get a team together," Mira ordered, turning toward Ilias. "I want eyes on every crew member and mercenary aboard. We're going to find out who's behind this." Ilias didn't need to be told twice. "Aye, Captain. We'll get on it immediately." She nodded, already moving toward the lift. But as she walked away, something gnawed at her. The realization that this wasn't a typical sabotage. It was too clean, too deliberate. Whoever had done this wasn't trying to kill them outright. They were setting something up, pulling strings behind the scenes. And that meant they had a far more dangerous plan in mind than just a few fried circuits. The day passed in a blur. Mira sat through several routine meetings with senior officers, her mind half on the council's decree and half on the sabotage unfolding around them. Her thoughts were interrupted only when another report came in. The power grid had been destabilized, but a secondary team managed to stabilize it, barely. "Any signs of the mercenaries?" she asked Ilias in the comms channel as the hours wore on. "I've had several of them under surveillance," Ilias replied, "but nothing concrete yet. They're moving too carefully. It's like they know we're watching." A shadow passed in the background of his feed, and Mira's stomach flipped. She recognized the shape immediately. It was Vilek, the trail counselor. His violet skin shimmered faintly under the lights as he made his way down the corridor. "Keep an eye on him," she ordered quickly, leaning closer to the screen. Ilias's expression darkened. "I don't trust him, but he's not one of the mercenaries." "I don't care," Mira replied. "I want him followed. He might know more than we think." Hours turned into the long stretch of the night cycle. Mira didn't sleep. She couldn't. The hum of the engines and the faint movement of Korr beside her kept her company. He could sense her unease, even when she didn't show it. His body pressed close to hers as she stared out the viewport, the stars beyond a cold sea of infinite distance. It was almost 0200 when the alert came. "Captain!" Ilias's voice cracked through the comms, barely audible over the static. "We've got movement." "Where?" "Cargo Bay 2. They're assembling, and we've got multiple mercenaries." "Vilek's not alone. He's with them." Mira's heart skipped. "On my way." The lift carried her down to the lower decks in seconds, her pulse quickening as she reached the cargo bay. The doors slid open, revealing a cavernous chamber full of stacked containers. The low hum of energy fields buzzed in the background. There, standing in the shadows, were Vilek and the mercenaries. It was a trap they'd been setting from the very beginning. Before Mira could move, Korr stepped out beside her, low and tense, a growl vibrating in his chest. Vilek turned his head slowly, his eyes locking on Mira's with a dark amusement. "You're too late, Captain," he said, his voice a sharp whisper of victory. Mira didn't answer. Instead, she placed herself in front of Korr, who stood at the ready, watching the mercenaries with focused intensity. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. The air in the cargo bay was electric, charged with the tension of 100 unsaid threats. Mira held her stance, legs slightly apart, fingers flexing instinctively near the stun blade at her side. Korr stood in front of her now, no longer growling. He was utterly still, save for the raised fur along his spine and the focused gleam in his eyes. He was reading the room with instincts honed by years of trust and survival, and he didn't like what he saw. Vilek stepped forward. He wasn't armed, not visibly, but the smug curve of his thin mouth was a weapon in itself. He tilted his head, studying Mira like a predator might a wounded animal too proud to run. "You still don't understand," he said, spreading his arms as if addressing a crowd. "The Council feared you would, feared that you might actually lead. But they've tied your hands, haven't they?" "They didn't tie anything," Mira snapped, keeping her voice low. "I'm still in command, and this is still my ship." Vilek chuckled softly, gesturing around. Not for long. Behind him, more mercenaries appeared. 8, maybe 10, each armored, each carrying weaponry that had no place on a vessel of peace. Mira's eyes scanned the formation. They were disciplined. This wasn't an improvised mutiny. This was precision. "You're not just sabotaging systems," she said slowly. "You're taking the ship." "Not just the ship," Vilek corrected. "The future. Your kind, humans, with your sentimentality, your ridiculous affection for lesser species. You're a relic. This fleet needs strength, unity, not affection for pets." At that word, pets, Korr's snarl finally returned, a low, rumbling threat that vibrated through the deck plates. "He's not a pet," Mira said, her voice sharp enough to cut. "He's my partner." Vilek smirked. "He's an animal." That was when it happened. A mercenary shifted, barely, but Korr moved first, a blur of fur and fury. His jaws clamped down on the attacker's arm before the man even raised his weapon. The mercenary screamed, dropping his rifle as Korr wrenched him down. Chaos exploded. The mercenary shouted, scattering to regroup, weapons rising. Mira moved instantly, her stun blade flaring to life with a shrill hiss, slicing across the nearest attacker's side. Korr was a ghost, weaving through the ranks with terrifying grace, every movement calculated, brutal. One moment he was on the floor, the next he'd leapt onto a second mercenary, his fangs flashing. Mira held her ground beside him, matching his pace, her blade flickering blue in the dim cargo bay lighting. Vilek retreated behind a column of crates, barking orders in a language Mira didn't recognize. She pivoted, kicking an attacker square in the chest, sending him crashing into a stack of supply canisters. Her mind raced, not just to survive, but to end this before the entire bay turned into a war zone. They couldn't afford an alert. Not yet. Not without proof. Then came a blinding flash, a concussive pulse grenade. Mira was thrown back, her ears ringing, body skidding against the cold steel deck. She blinked hard, vision swimming, and saw Korr likewise stunned but rising again, teeth bared in a bloody snarl. Vilek was gone. No! Mira growled, forcing herself up. She staggered toward the last direction he had been. But one of the mercenaries, larger than the others, stepped into her path. He lunged. She brought up her blade, just in time, parrying his strike with her forearm and driving her weapon upward through his chest. He gasped and collapsed, and she shoved him aside without hesitation. Her eyes locked on Korr, who was now bleeding from a shallow cut along his flank, but still moving with deadly focus. They had to regroup. She slammed a nearby panel, opening a maintenance hatch. "Korr," she called, and he was already bounding to her side. They disappeared into the crawl space, the hatch sealing behind them. Mira could hear the shouts growing distant as they scrambled through the narrow corridor, ducking pipes and conduit bundles. "You saved me," she breathed once the noise fell away. Again, Korr gave her a look, something between irritation and fierce loyalty. She touched his side, inspecting the wound. "We're not out yet, but damn if we're not going to make them regret everything." The crawlspace led them to a service tunnel above the engine deck. From there, Mira accessed an auxiliary terminal and began uploading a security loop of the encounter. She patched it into her command console, her fingers flying across the interface. Within seconds, footage of Vilek and the mercenaries in full view of unauthorized weapons and coordinated sabotage was encrypted and tagged for command override. She tapped her comm link. "Ilias. Static. Then, Captain, we've got readings all over. What the hell is happening? Vilek's staged a coup. I have proof. I'm sending it now. Lock down all docking bays and secure armories. I want a full alert, but quiet. No alarms yet. We don't let them know we're ready." "Understood. We'll keep it surgical." "Good. And Ilias, make sure the rest of the command staff is loyal. No one without clearance gets near the bridge." She ended the call, breathing heavily. Her shoulder throbbed from the blast impact, and Korr looked just as worn. But they'd survived. More than that, they had leverage. "Let's move," she whispered. Next stop, the bridge. Navigating through hidden maintenance shafts and in used passages, Mira and Korr emerged on Deck 7, just one level below the bridge. The corridor was dim, emergency lights casting long shadows across the floor. She glanced at Korr. If they control the bridge, they control everything. Life support, communications, navigation. We lose that, we lose the Concordia. A low growl of agreement was all the response she needed. Suddenly, footsteps echoed. Mira ducked into an alcove, drawing Korr with her. 3 mercenaries passed, scanning the hall, talking in hushed tones. She recognized one as Vilek's bodyguard, a brute named Zoran. She didn't engage yet. Once they passed, she moved quickly, hot-wiring a side panel and accessing the bridge's secondary entry control. From here, she could flood the bridge with a localized gas that would knock out anyone not wearing a command filter respirator. Mira hadn't approved its installation, but she remembered it. "Hope you boys didn't read the manual," she muttered, pressing the sequence. The gas hissed silently into the bridge ventilation. Mira watched through a feed as the mercenaries inside, two at the helm, slumped over one by one. Then silence. She and Korr moved fast, emerging into the bridge to find it littered with unconscious bodies. No Vilek. He hadn't made it up here, but the controls were untouched. Mira stepped into the captain's dais, palms hovering over the command interface. "Ilias," she said into the comms, voice steely now. "We have the bridge." His answer came quickly, proud and certain. "The rest of the crew is on lockdown. We've got loyal teams sweeping the lower decks." "What now?" "Now," she said, voice cold as deep space. "We hunt." Beside her, Korr sat, tail still, eyes alert. Vilek wasn't finished yet, but neither were they. The bridge pulsed with the low hum of systems running under emergency protocols, lights flickering across command consoles like the heartbeat of a wounded beast. Mira stood at the center, silhouetted by the glow of the navigation array, her expression etched in resolve. Korr sat beside her, breathing steady but shallow, his eyes locked on the closed doors. He hadn't moved much since they'd secured the bridge. Every muscle in his body coiled with readiness, as though he knew the battle wasn't over. Not yet. "Ilias, report," Mira said, her voice cutting through the static of the comms. "We've swept decks 6 through 9. Resistance was light. Vilek's people scattered when they realized we had the bridge. No casualties on our end, but he's still at large. Last sighting had him heading toward the AI core." Mira's jaw clenched. Of course, if Vilek couldn't control the ship through the bridge, he'd try to do it through the heart. "Seal off all main access routes to engineering," she said. "Cut him off from the core and reroute the AI's uplink to the bridge. I'll handle him myself." "Copy that." "Be careful, Captain." She closed the channel and turned toward the forward lift. Korr rose with her, his gait slightly uneven now, but his gaze unwavering. Mira knelt beside him, running her hand gently along his back. "You don't have to come," she murmured. His response was a quiet chuff, a refusal in the form of breath. "I didn't think so." They moved through the corridors like shadows, guided by Mira's override codes and Korr's nose. The ship had quieted. The chaos of the mutiny had given way to the eerie calm of a crew unsure whom to trust. Mira saw the glances through observation windows, eyes watching her passage, hoping she was the one to fix this. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She just walked. The path to the AI core was circuitous now. Vilek had predicted her move. Several bulkheads had been sealed off remotely, and security turrets lay wrecked along the auxiliary corridors, cleared for his path, not hers. They reached the threshold of the core room. The heavy door had been forced open, scorch marks lining its frame. Mira drew her sidearm, but kept the stun blade in her other hand. The AI core chamber was dim, its walls alive with swirling streams of data. The core itself, a spire of refractive crystal and integrated circuits, flickered as if wounded, and Vilek stood at its base. He turned slowly, hands behind his back. A fresh gash cut across his temple, blood tracing a line down his cheek. He looked less like a mutineer now and more like a cornered fanatic. "You're too late," he said quietly. "I've severed the mainline protocols. The ship's AI is no longer bound by command hierarchy." Mira stepped forward, cautious. "You think disabling protocol hierarchy gives you control?" "No," he said, a faint smile tugging at the edge of his mouth. "It gives me options. Options you wouldn't take." She leveled her weapon at him. "You've lost." "I haven't even started," he whispered. Then he turned to the core and touched a console. Alarms flared to life. The lights shifted red. Mira lunged, but not fast enough. Korr, however, was already in motion. He collided with Vilek before the man could finish his command, knocking him backward. The console sparked, partially executed instructions flickering across its display. Vilek rolled, reaching for a knife, but Mira was there in a flash, kicking the weapon away and pinning him to the floor with the weight of her knee. "You don't get to play God with this ship," she growled. "You're weak," he spat. "You risk everything for a damn animal." "He's more loyal than any man who's ever served under me," she hissed. "And a hell of a lot more human than you." Vilek's sneer crumbled as Mira pressed her stun blade to his chest. He convulsed once, then went still. Not dead, just unconscious. She didn't care to hear another word from him. Korr was panting now, his side bleeding again. Mira rushed him, pulling out a field med kit and applying a stabilizing patch. "You always do this," she whispered. "Throw yourself into danger like it's your job." Korr let out a soft, weary sound, pressing his head gently against her leg. She turned to the console. Whatever command Vilek had tried to initiate hadn't fully deployed. She managed to restore partial AI function to the bridge, enough to run diagnostics and flush the compromise code. It would take days to fully restore, but the crisis had been averted. With Vilek restrained and locked in a stasis pod, Mira returned to the bridge with Korr by her side. The crew met her with quiet relief. No cheers, no applause, just the solemn nods of professionals who had seen how close they'd come to losing everything. By the end of the day, all conspirators were accounted for. Most surrendered quietly. Some tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. The fleet stood united again, though not unscathed. Later, in the silence of her quarters, Mira stood by the viewport, watching the stars crawl by. Korr lay at her feet, wrapped in a thermal blanket. She held a cup of cooling tea in her hands, untouched. "I used to think being captain meant always making the right decisions," she said softly. "Now I think it's about protecting the right things." Korr made a low, affirmative sound. "They called you a pet," she added, "like you were mine. But I think it's the other way around. I belonged to you since the day you pulled me out of that wreck on Barrows 9. He blinked up at her, his eyes soft. She lowered herself to the floor beside him, setting the cup down. "They don't understand," she whispered, "and maybe they never will." But she knew, and so did Korr. The galaxy beyond remained dangerous. The scars left by the mutiny would take time to heal. Trust would be earned slowly, in quiet moments and small actions. But Mira wasn't afraid anymore. Because when the worst came, when knives were drawn and darkness rose, she wasn't alone. She had a partner. And heaven help the next fool who threatened the woman a wolf had chosen to protect.